Welcome to the 1000 Nights and 1 Night. Now, when it was the 601st night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that as soon as the damsel entered the sitting saloon, the youth sprang up to her and flung his arms around her neck and kissed her hands and feet. She was confounded at his loveliness, as well at the beauty of the place and the profusion of meat and drink, flowers and perfumes that she saw therein, and deemed it was all a dream. When the old woman saw her amazement, she said to her, The name of Allah be upon thee, O my daughter. Fear not. I am here sitting with thee, and will not leave thee for a moment. Thou art worthy of him, and he is worthy of thee. So the damsel sat down shamefast and in great confusion, but the young man jested and toyed with her and entertained her with laughable stories and loving verses till her breast broadened, and she became at ease. Then they ate and drank, and growing warm with wine, took the lute and sang these couplets. My friend, who hath returned once more, oh, the welcome light that such beauty shows! And but for the fear of those arrowy eyes, from his lovely cheek I have culled the rose. And when the youth saw that she to his beauty did incline, he waxed drunken without wine, and his life was a light matter to him compared with his love. Presently the old woman went out and left them alone to enjoy their loves till the next morning. And when she went into them and gave them both good morrow, and asked the damsel, How hast thou passed the night, O my lady? Answered the girl, Right well, thanks to thy adroitness and the excellence of thy going between. Then said the old woman, Up, let us go back to thy mother. At these words the young man pulled out 100 sequins and gave them to her, saying, Take this, and leave her with me tonight. So she left them, and repaired to the girl's mother, to whom quoth she, Thy daughter saluteth thee, and the bride's mother hath sworn her to abide with him this night. Replied the mother, O my sister, bear her my salam, and if it please and amuse the girl, there is no harm in her staying the night. So let her do this, and divert herself, and come back to me at her leisure, for all I fear for her is chagrin on account of an angry husband. The old woman ceased not to make excuse after excuse to the girl's mother, and to put off cheat upon her, till Mizia had tarried 7 days with the young man, of whom she took 100 dinars each day for herself, while he enjoyed all the solace of life and coitin. But at the end of this time the girl's mother said to her, Bring my daughter back to me forthright, for I am uneasy about her, because she hath been gone so long, and I misdoubt me of this. So the old woman went out, saying, Woe to thee! Shall such words be spoken to the like of me? And going to the young man's house, took the girl by the hand, and carried her away, leaving him lying asleep on his bed, for he was drunken with wine, to her mother. She received her with pleasure and gladness, in seeing her in redoubled beauty and brilliancy, rejoiced in her with exceeding joy, saying, O my daughter, my heart was troubled about thee, and in my uneasiness I offended against my sister Coranst with a speech that wounded her. Replied Mazia, Rise, and kiss her hands and feet, for she hath been to me as a servant in my hour of need, and if not, thou art no mamma of mine, nor am I thy girl. So the mother went up once to the old woman, and made her peace with her. Meanwhile the young man recovered from his drunkenness, and missed the damsel, but congratulated himself on having enjoyed his desire. Presently Miriam, the oldest Koranist, came in to him and saluted him, saying, What thinkest thou of my feat? Quoth he, Excellency, well conceived and contrived of thee was that time. Then quoth she, Come, let us mend what we have marred, and restore this girl to her husband, for we have been the cause of their separation, and it is unrighteousness. Asked he, How shall we do this? And she answered, Go to Abu Alfath's shop, and salute him, and sit down by him, till thou seest me pass by. When do thou rise in haste, and catch hold of my dress, and abuse me, and threaten me, demanding of me the veil. And do thou say to the merchant, Thou knowest, O my lord, the face veil I bought of thee for 50 dinars. It so chanced that my handmaid put it on and burnt a corner of it by accident. So she gave it to this old woman, who took it, promising to get it fine drawn, and return it, and went away, nor have I seen her from that day forward. With joy and goodwill, plied the young man, and rising forthwith, walked to the shop of the silk merchant, with whom he sat a while, till, behold, the old woman passed, telling her beads on a rosary she held in her hand. Whereupon he sprang up, and laying hold of her dress, began to abuse and rail at her, while she answered him with fair words, saying, Indeed, my son, thou art excusable. So the people of the bazaar flocked round the two, saying, What is the matter? And he replied, O folk, I bought of this merchant a veil for 50 dinars, and gave it to my slave girl, who wore it a while, and then sat down to fumigate with perfume. Presently a spark flew out of the censer, and lighting on the edge of the veil, burnt a hole in it. So we committed it to this pestilent old woman, that she might give it to who should fix it and return it to us. But we have not seen eyes of it since that very day, answered the old woman. This young man speaks sooth. I had the veil from him, but I took it with me into one of the houses where I am wont to visit, and I forgot it there, nor do I know where I left it. And being a poor woman, I feared its owner, and dared not face him. Now the girl's husband was listening to all this, and Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 602nd night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the young man seized the old woman, and spoke to her of the veil as she had primed her, the girl's husband was listening to all they said, from beginning to end. And when he heard the tale which the crafty old woman had contrived with the young man, he rose to his feet and said, Allah Almighty, I crave pardon of the Omnipotent One for my sins, and for what my heart suspected. And he praised the Lord, who had discovered to him the truth. Then he accosted the old woman, and said to her, Dost thou use to visit us? Replied she, O my son, I visit you, and other than you, for the sake of alms. But from that day to this, none hath given me news of the veil. Asked the merchant, Hast thou inquired at my house? And she answered, O my lord, I did indeed go to thy house and ask, but they told me that the person of the house had been divorced by the merchant. So I went away, and I asked no farther. Nor have I inquired of anybody else until this day. Hereupon the merchant turned to the young man and said, Let the old woman go her way, for the veil is with me. So saying, he brought it out from the shop, and gave it to the fine drawer before all present. Then he betook himself to his wife, and giving her somewhat of money, took her to himself again, after making abundance of excuses to her, and asking pardon of Allah, because he knew not what the old woman had done. Said the wazir, This then, O king, is an instance of the malice of women, and for another to the same purport I have heard tell the following annet about the king's son and the Ifrit's mistress. A certain king's son was once walking along for his pleasure, when he came to a green meadow abounding in trees, laden with fruits and birds singing on the boughs, and a river running athwart. The place pleased him, so he sat down there, and taking out some dried fruits he had brought with him, began to eat, when lo! He espied a great smoke rising up to the heaven, and taking fright, he climbed up into the tree, and hid himself among the branches. Thence he saw an Ifrit rise out of the midst of the stream, bearing on his head a chest of marble secured by a padlock. He set down the chest on the meadow sward, and opened it, and there came forth a damsel of mortal race, like the sun shining in the sheeny sky. After seeing her, he solaced himself by gazing on her a while, and then laid his head in her lap and fell asleep. Whereupon she lifted up his head, and laying it on the chest, rose and walked about. Presently she chanced to raise her eyes to the tree wherein was the prince, and seeing him, signed to him to come down. He refused, but she swore to him, saying, Except thou come down and do as I bid thee, I will wake the Ifrit, and pointed thee out to him, when he will straightway kill you. The king's son, fearing she would do as she had said, came down, and whereupon she kissed his hands and feet, and besought him to do her need. To this he consented, and when he had satisfied her wants, she said to him, Give me this thy seal ring I see on thy finger. So he gave her his signet, and she set in it a silken kerchief she had with her, wherein were more than 80 others. When the prince saw this, he asked her, What dost thou with all these rings? And she answered, In very sooth, this Ifrit carry me off from my father's palace, and shut me in this box which he beareth about his head wherever he goeth, with the keys about him. And he hardly leaveth me one moment alone in the excess of his jealousy over me, and hindereth me from what I desire. When I saw this, I swore that I would deny my last favours to no man whatso with these rings thou seest after the tale of the men who have had me. For after I took from each a seal ring and laid it in this kerchief. Then she added, And now go thy ways, that I may look for another than thyself, for the Ifrit will not awake yet awhile. Hardly crediting what he had heard, the prince returned to his father's palace, but the king knew not of the damsel's malice, for she feared not this, and took no count thereof. And seeing that his son had lost his ring, he bade him be put to death. Then he rose from his place and entered the palace, but his wazirs came into him, and prevailed with him to abandon his purpose. The same night the king sent for all of them, and thanked them for having dissuaded him from slaying his son. And the prince also thanked them, saying, It was well done of you to counsel my father to let me live, and inshallah, I will soon requite you abundantly. Then he related to them how he had lost the ring, and they offered up prayers for his long life and advancement, and withdrew. See then, O king, said the wazir, the malice of women, and what they do unto men. The king hearkened to the minister's counsel, and again countermanded his order to slay his son. Next morning, it being the 8th day, as the king sat in his audience chamber in the midst of the grandees and emirs and wazirs and Olema, the prince entered with his hand in that of his governor, Sandal-wood, and praised his father and his ministers and lords and divines in the most eloquent of words, and thanked them for saving his life, so that all who were present wondered at his eloquence and fluency of speech. His father rejoiced at him with exceeding all-surpassing joy, and calling him to him, kissed him between the eyes. Then he called his preceptor, Sandal-wood, and asked him why his son had kept silent these 7 days, to which he replied, O our lord, the truth is, it was I who enjoined him to this, in my fear for him of death. I knew this from the day of his birth, and when I took his nativity, I found it written in the stars, that if he should speak during this period, he would surely die. But now the danger is over by the king's fortune. At this the king was glad, and said to his wazirs, If I had killed my son, would the fault have fallen on me, or the damsel, or on the preceptor, Sandal-wood? But all present refrained from replying, and Sandal-wood said to the prince, Answer thou, O my son. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 603rd night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when Sandal-wood said, Answer thou, O my son, the prince replied, I have heard tell that a merchant at whose house certain guests once alighted sent his slave girl to the market to buy a jar of clotted milk. So she bought it, and set it out on her return home. But on the way there passed over her a kite, holding and squeezing a serpent in its claws, and a drop of the serpent's venom fell into the milk jar, unknown of the girl. So when she came back, the merchant took the milk from her and drank of it, he and his guests, but hardly had it settled in their stomachs when they all died. Now consider, O king, whose was the fault in this matter? Thereupon some present said, It was the fault of the company who drank the milk without examining it. And the other said, That of the girl who left the jar without a cover. But Sandal-wood asked the prince, What sayest thou, O my son? Answered he, I say that the folk err. It was neither the fault of the damsel, nor of the company, for their appointed hour was come, and their divinely decreed provision was exhausted, and Allah had foreordained them to die thus. When the courtiers heard this, they marveled greatly, and lifted up their voices, blessing the king's son, and saying, O our lord, thou hast made a reply sans poor, and thou art the sagest man of thine ages, sans reproach. Indeed, I am no sage, answered the prince. The blind sheikh and the son of 3 years and the son of 5 years were wiser than I. Said the bystander, O youth, tell us the stories of these 3 who were wiser than thou art, O youth. Answered he, With all my heart. I have heard this tale concerning the sandalwood merchant and the sharpers. There once lived an exceedingly rich merchant who had great travels and who visited all manner of places. Now, one day, being minded to journey to a certain city, he asked those who came thence what kind of goods brought most profit there, and they answered, Chander's wood, for it selleth at a high price. So he laid out all his money in sandal, and set out for the city. And arriving there at close of day, behold, he met an old woman driving her sheep. Quoth she to him, Who art thou, old man? And quoth he, I am a stranger, a merchant. Beware of the townsfolk, said she, for they are cheats, rascals, robbers, who love nothing more than imposing on the foreigner, that they might get the better of him and devour his substance. Indeed, I give thee good counsel. Then she left him, and on the morrow there met him one of the citizens, who saluted him and asked him, O Lord, whence comest thou? Answered the merchant, From such a place. And what merchandise hast thou brought with thee? Inquired the other, and he replied, Chander's wood, for it is high price with you. Quoth the townsman, He blundered who told thee that, for we burn nothing but under our cookpot save sandalwood, whose worth is nothing but that of fuel. When the merchant heard this, he sighed and repented, and stood balanced between belief and unbelief. Then he alighted at one of the khans of the city, and when it was night, he saw a merchant making fire of Chander's wood under his cooking pot. Now this was the man who had spoken with him, and his proceeding was a trick of his. When the townsman saw the merchant looking at him, he asked, Wilt thou sell me thy sandalwood for the measure of whatever thy soul shall desire? I sell it to thee, answered the merchant, and the buyer transported all the wood to his own house and stored it up, whilst the seller purported to take an equal quantity of gold for it. Next morning, the merchant, who was a blue-eyed man, went out to walk in the city. But as he went along, one of the townfolk, who was blue-eyed and one-eyed to boot, caught hold of him, saying, Thou art he who stole my eye, and I will never let thee go. The merchant denied this, saying, I never stole it. The thing is impossible. Whereupon the folk collected round them and besought the one-eyed man to grant him till the morrow, that he might give him the price of his eye. So the merchant procured one to be surety for him, and they let him go. Now his sandal had been rent in the struggle with the one-eyed man, so he stopped at the cobbler's stall and gave it to him, saying, Mend it, and thou shalt have of me what shall content thee. Then he went on till he came to some people sitting at a play of forfeits, and sat down with them to divert his cark and care. They invited him to play with them, and he did so. But they practised on him, and overcoming him, offered him his choice, either to drink up the sea or disperse all the money he had. Have patience with me till tomorrow, said he, and they granted him the delay he sought, whereupon he went away sore concerned for what had betided him, and knowing not how he should do, and sat down in a solitary place, heavy-hearted, careful, thought-oppressed. And behold, the old woman passed by, and seeing him thus, said to him, Peradventure, the townsfolk have gotten the better of thee? For I see thee troubled at that which hath befallen thee. Recount to me what aileth thee. So he told her all that had passed from first to last, and said, As for him who diddled thee, and the matter of the Chander's wood, thou must know that with him and with us it is worth 10 gold pieces a pound. But I will give thee a rede, whereby I trust that thou shalt deliver thyself, and it is this. Go to such and such a gate, whereby lives a blind sheik, a cripple, who is knowing, wise as a wizard, and experienced, and all resort to him and ask him what they require, when he counsels them what will be for their advantage, for he is versed in craft and magic and trickery. Now he is sharper, and sharpers resort to him by night. Therefore, I repeat, go thou to his lodging, and hide thyself from thine adversaries, so thou mayest hear what they say unseen of them. For he telleth them which party got the better, and which got the worse, and happily thou shalt learn from them some plan which may avail deliverance for thee from them. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased saying her permitted say. Now, when it was the 604th night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the old woman said to the merchant, Go this night to that expert who is frequented by the townsfolk, and hide thine identity. Haply thou shalt hear from them some plea which shall deliver thee from thine adversaries. So he went to the place she mentioned, and hid himself, albeit he took a seat near the blind man. Before long up came the Sheikh's company, who were wont to choose him for their judgment. They saluted the oldster and one another, and sat down round him, whereupon the merchant recognized his 4 adversaries. The chief set somewhat of the food before him, and they ate. Then each began to tell what had befallen him during the day, and amongst the rest came forward he of the Sandal-wood, and told the sheikh how he had bought of one man sandal below its price, and had agreed to pay for it a saw or measure of whatever the seller should desire. Quoth the old man, Thine opponent hath the better of thee. Asked the other, How can that be? And the sheikh answered, What if I say I will take the measure full of gold or silver? Wilt thou give it to him? Yes, replied the other, I will give it to him, and still be the gainer. And the sheikh answered, And if he say, I will take the measure full of fleas, half male and half female, thou wilt do, what wilt thou do? So the sharper knew that he was worsted. Then it came forward the one-eyed man, and said, O sheikh, I met today a blue-eyed man, a stranger to the town. So I picked a quarrel with him, and caught hold of him, saying, 'Twas thou that robbest me of my eye. Nor did I let him go till some became surety for him, that he should return to me tomorrow, and satisfy me for my eye. Quoth the oldster, If he will, he may have the better of thee, and thou the worst. How so? Asked the sharper. And the chief said, He may say to thee, Pluck out thine eye, and I will pluck out one of mine, and then we will weigh them both. And if thine eye be the same weight as mine, thou sayest sooth in what thou avouchest. So wilt thou owe him the legal price of his eye, and be stone blind, whilst he will see with his other eye. So the sharper knew that the merchant might baffle him with such a plea. Then came the cobbler and said, O sheikh, a man brought me his sandal shoe today, saying, Mend this. Saying, Mend this, and I asked him, What wage wilt thou give me? When he answered, Thou shalt have of me what will content thee. Now nothing will content me but all the wealth he hath. Quoth the oldster, And he may take his sandal from thee, and give thee nothing. How so? Quoth the cobbler. And quoth the sheikh, He has but to say to thee, The Sultan's enemies are put to the rout, his foes are waxed weak, and his children and helpers are multiplied. Art thou content or no? If thou say, I am content, he will take his sandal and go away. And if thou say, I am not content, he will take his sandal and beat thee therewith over the face and neck. So the cobbler owned himself worsted. Then came forward the gamester and said, O sheikh, I played at forfeits with a man today, and beat him, and quoth I to him, If thou drink the sea, I will give thee all my wealth, and if not, I will take all that is thine. Replied the chief, And he may worse thee. How so? Asked the sharper. And the sheikh answered, He hath but to say, Hold from me the mouth of the sea in thine hand, and give it to me, and I will drink it. But thou wilt not be able to do this, so he will baffle thee with his plea. When the merchant heard this, he knew how it behooved him to deal with his adversaries. Then the sharper left the sheikh, and the merchant returned to his lodging. Now when morning morrow, the gamester came to him and summoned him to drink the sea. So he said to him, Hold for me its mouth, and I will drink it up. Whereupon he confessed himself beaten, and redeemed his forfeit by paying 100 gold pieces. Then came the cobbler, and sought of him what would content him. Quoth the merchant, Our lord the Sultan hath overcome his foes, and hath destroyed his enemies, and his children are multiplied. Art thou content or no? I am content, replied the cobbler, and giving up the shoe, without wage went away. Next came the one-eyed man, and demanded the legal price of his eye. Said the merchant, Pluck out thine eye, and I will pluck out mine. Then we will weigh them, and if they are equal in weight, I will acknowledge thy truth, and pay thee the price of thine eye. But if they differ, thou liest, and I will sue thee for the price of mine eye. Quoth the one-eyed man, Grant me time. But the merchant answered, saying, I am a stranger, and grant time to none, nor will I part from thee till thou pay. So the sharper ransomed his eye by paying him 100 ducats, and went away. Last of all, they came to the buyer of the chandler's wood and said, "Take the price of thy ware." Asked the merchant, "What wilt thou give me?" And the other answered, "We agreed for a measure of whatever thou shouldest desire. So if thou wilt take it full of gold and silver—" "Not I," rejoined the merchant. "Not I. Nothing shall serve me, but I must have it full of fleas, half male and half female." Said the sharper, "I can do nothing of the kind," and confessing himself beaten, returned him his sandalwood, and redeemed himself from him with 100 sequins to be off of his bargain. Then the merchant sold the chandler's wood at his own price, and quitting that city of sharpers, returned to his own land. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. And so do I cease the telling of my tales for today, till it be morrow.